"She's barren and worthless," her husband said, trading her to the mountain man for whiskey. That's what the town remembers. The bottle, the silence, the way she didn't flinch. No tears, no fight. Just a woman walking into the snow beside a man no one understands. But up in the high country, where winter bites and the past don't stay buried, something quiet begins to stir. Not love. Not yet. But something stronger than shame, and more dangerous than regret. And when the past comes riding back with law and lies, only one question remains. What's a woman truly worth, when the world's already named her worthless? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The late summer sun sank behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the weathered boards of the Red Dog Saloon. Mercy Haskins sat with her hands folded in her lap, her brown cotton dress faded but neat as her husband Clay's voice grew louder with each gulp of whiskey. "Ain't nothing but a burden," Clay slurred, swaying on his feet. The miners and cowhands ducked their heads, suddenly fascinated by their drinks. 7 years, and not a single child to show for it. He jabbed a finger toward Mercy. "Barren as winter ground, that's what you are." Mercy kept her eyes down, her face still as stone. She'd learned long ago that silence was safer than words. The familiar shame burned in her chest, but she wouldn't give Clay the satisfaction of seeing her cry. At the bar stood a tall man Mercy had noticed earlier, half Indian by his looks, with a deep scar running down one cheek. Unlike the others, he met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes holding neither pity nor judgment. Clay stumbled over to the bar, grabbing the stranger's sleeve. "Say there, mountain man. I've seen you watching. How about a trade?" He gave a cruel laugh. "One worthless wife for that jug of whiskey." "Hell, throw in that old Hawken rifle too, and she's yours." The saloon went quiet. Even the piano player stopped, his fingers frozen over the keys. Mercy's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face carefully blank. The mountain man, Isaiah Coulter, she'd heard someone call him, studied Clay for a long moment. Then he reached for his rifle and the sealed jug beside him. "Deal," he said simply, his voice deep and steady. A few men muttered. Others shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to stop what was happening. Clay's bloodshot eyes widened, as if surprised his cruel joke had found a taker. Then he grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Well then, Mercy, looks like you've got yourself a new master." He spat on the floor. "Good riddance to bad fortune." Mercy rose slowly, gathering her worn shawl around her shoulders. Without a word, she walked to Isaiah's side. He paid the bartender, then guided her outside with a gentle hand at her elbow. 2 horses waited in the deepening dusk, Isaiah's sturdy mountain pony and an older mare he'd borrowed from the livery. He helped Mercy mount, his touch respectful, then swung into his own saddle. They rode in silence as the moon rose, climbing steadily into the mountains. Mercy noticed the leather-bound Bible in his saddlebag, its corners softened with use. The sight gave her a measure of comfort, though she'd learned the hard way that carrying scripture didn't always mean living by it. The trail wound higher, through stands of pine and aspen. The horses' hooves crunched on gravel and needle-covered ground. After several hours, they reached a small cabin nestled against a cliff face. A stream tumbled nearby, its voice a constant whisper in the darkness. Isaiah helped her down, then led the horses to a lean-to shelter. Mercy stood very still, her legs stiff from riding. When he returned, he opened the cabin door and gestured for her to enter. The interior was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a narrow bed tucked in the corner. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a few carved wooden figures stood on the mantel. A deer, an eagle, a bear. Isaiah struck a match and soon had a fire crackling. He moved efficiently, laying out blankets on the floor near the hearth for himself. "The bed's yours," he said quietly. "I'll sleep here." Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's shutters. But inside, the space remained peaceful. Mercy sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you agree to his trade?" Isaiah added another log to the fire before answering. "No person should be treated as property," he said. "I reckoned you needed a way out." He paused. "You're free to go wherever you please come morning. I'll help you get to wherever you want to go." Mercy studied his face in the firelight. The scar on his cheek was deep, but his eyes were kind. Outside, the storm grew closer, but for the first time in years, she felt something like safety settling over her. She lay down fully clothed on the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Isaiah stretched out on his blankets, his breathing soon growing slow and steady. Mercy stayed awake for a long time, listening to the rain on the roof and the quiet crackle of the fire, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The first rays of sunlight crept through the cabin's single window, rousing Mercy from her fitful sleep. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the small space, but Isaiah was nowhere to be seen. His blankets lay neatly folded by the hearth. Outside, the steady thunk of an axe split the morning quiet. Mercy wrapped her shawl tighter and peered through the window. Isaiah worked methodically, his breath visible in the crisp mountain air as he chopped firewood. His movements were sure and practiced, each stroke precise. Mercy's eyes fell on the worn broom in the corner. After 7 years of marriage to Clay, she'd learned to read moods like weather signs, but Isaiah's silence felt different. Not threatening, just quiet. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the broom handle and began to sweep. The cabin's plank floor was already fairly clean, but the familiar motion steadied her. When Isaiah came in with an armload of wood, he paused at the threshold, then gave her a single solemn nod. "Much obliged," he said softly. Days passed like water in the stream, steady, unhurried. Mercy found herself falling into routine, though she kept waiting for the peace to shatter. She cooked simple meals from Isaiah's stored provisions: beans, dried venison, cornbread. Each morning, Isaiah would check his trap lines or tend to the horses, returning with whatever the day provided. On the third afternoon, Mercy sat by the window, trying to mend a tear in her old cloak. Her fingers, stiff from years of ranch work, struggled with the fine stitches. Without a word, Isaiah held out his hand for the garment. She hesitated, then passed it over. His large hands, which she'd seen skin game and split logs, moved with surprising delicacy. The stitches he made were small and even, nearly invisible in the worn fabric. The care in that simple act brought an unexpected lump to her throat. That evening, as snow clouds gathered over the peaks, they shared a supper of rabbit stew. The silence between them had grown comfortable enough that Mercy found herself speaking. "I used to sing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "in the church back home in Missouri." She stirred her stew, remembering. "Mama taught me all the old hymns before she passed." Isaiah looked up from his bowl, his dark eyes attentive. He didn't push or pry, just listened. The simple act of being heard, really heard, made Mercy's chest tight. "Which was your favorite?" he asked after a while, his deep voice gentle. "Amazing Grace," she replied, then fell silent, remembering how Clay had forbidden her singing, calling it caterwauling. Isaiah just nodded, returning to his meal. No demands, no unwanted touch, no expectation hanging in the air between them. Just quiet respect that felt as warming as the fire. Later that night, Mercy woke to see the first snow beginning to fall. The flakes drifted past the window like feathers, slowly blanketing the high valley in white silence. The fire had burned low, casting soft shadows on the walls. Something in the peaceful darkness cracked open inside her. Mercy slipped from her bed and knelt by the hearth, tears falling silently as prayers she hadn't dared speak in years spilled from her lips. "Lord, help me," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being afraid." Through her tears, she glimpsed Isaiah standing at the window, his broad shoulders outlined against the snow-filled night. In his hand, he held something, a piece of paper that looked well-handled, its edges soft. Even in the dim light, Mercy could make out the careful lines of a child's face drawn in charcoal. Isaiah's expression, usually so controlled, held a depth of loss that made her heart ache in recognition. They were both carrying wounds, she realized, both haunted by what they'd lost. The snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called out to the night. Mercy remained by the fire, her prayers turning from pleas to simple gratitude for this quiet shelter, this moment of peace. For the first time since Clay had traded her away like cattle, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. Isaiah tucked the drawing carefully into his shirt pocket and returned to his blankets by the fire. Neither spoke of what they'd witnessed in each other's pain. The silence between them held understanding, and perhaps the first fragile seeds of trust. The morning frost crackled under their horses' hooves as Isaiah and Mercy prepared to leave the cabin. A week had passed, marked by quiet meals and growing trust. Isaiah secured the last pack to his bay gelding before turning to Mercy. "Need supplies from Elk Hollow," he said, adjusting his worn leather coat. "You'll be safe here." Mercy straightened her spine, clutching her mended cloak tight. "I'm coming with you." Her voice was soft but firm. "I won't be left behind. Not again." Isaiah studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. They set out as dawn painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Mercy found herself watching Isaiah's broad shoulders as he led the way, noting how he constantly scanned the path ahead, alert for danger. By late afternoon, dark clouds threatened more snow. Isaiah guided them toward a weathered building nestled against a cliff face, Walker's Way Station. The innkeeper, a round-faced man named Hank, recognized Mercy immediately. His eyes widened as he handed them their room keys. "Mrs. Haskins?" he stammered. "Why, we heard tell that you—" Isaiah's quiet stare cut him short. Still, Mercy heard the whispers as she climbed the narrow stairs to her room. Clay Haskins's wife, with that half-breed trapper, shameful business. That night, Mercy lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside her window, wondering what other rumors awaited them in town. They reached Elk Hollow by mid-morning the next day. The street was busy with wagons and townspeople going about their business. Isaiah dismounted first, then helped Mercy down from her horse. He pressed several coins into her palm. "For whatever you need," he said quietly. "You choose." Mercy's fingers closed around the money, the first she'd held in years. Under Clay's rule, she'd never been trusted with so much as a penny. The general store's bell chimed as she entered. Mrs. Peterson behind the counter went silent mid-sentence, staring. Mercy kept her head high as she selected flour, coffee, and a new sewing needle. The whispers followed her like shadows. "Living in sin up in them mountains. That Indian scout, Clay Haskins' property." Outside the post office, where Isaiah was collecting his mail, a familiar voice cut through the morning air. "Well, if it ain't the savage himself." Virgil Haskins stood in the street, his stance wide and threatening. He'd always been the smoother talker of the Haskins brothers, hiding his cruelty behind civil words. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the tension. "Come to return what you stole?" Virgil's hand rested on his gun belt. "My brother's wife belongs at home, not being kept like property by some half-breed mountain man." Isaiah's face remained impassive, but Mercy saw his shoulders tense. Mrs. Haskins makes her own choices now." "Choices?" Virgil spat. "You bought her for whiskey and a broken gun. That's not choice. That's theft of property." He raised his voice to address the growing crowd. "Good folks of Elk Hollow, are we going to let this savage keep a white woman against her will?" Mercy stepped forward, anger burning away her fear. "I chose to leave." "Hush now, Mercy," Virgil cut her off. "We all know what kind of pressure he's put on you. What kind of things savages do to—" The word died in his throat as Isaiah took one step forward. The morning sun caught the old cavalry scout medal pinned to his coat, a detail Virgil had overlooked. But before either man could move, boots thudded on the wooden sidewalk. Marshal Turner pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the light. "What's all this, then?" he demanded, looking between the men. Virgil's smile turned triumphant. "Marshal, I'm reporting a kidnapping. This man took my brother's wife by force and is keeping her captive in the mountains." "That's not true," Mercy protested, but the marshal held up his hand. "Mr. Coulter," he said gravely, "I'm afraid you'll have to come with me until we sort this out." He turned to Mercy. "Mrs. Haskins, you'd best come along too. We'll need your statement." Isaiah offered his wrists without resistance as the marshal pulled out his handcuffs. The crowd muttered and shifted, some looking uncomfortable, others nodding in satisfaction. "The law's clear about taking white women," Virgil announced loudly. "Even half-breeds should know better." Mercy watched helplessly as the marshal led Isaiah away. The coins he'd given her felt heavy in her pocket, a symbol of the freedom he'd offered, now threatened by the same kind of ownership she'd thought she'd escaped. The whispers followed them all the way to the jailhouse, where the cell door clanged shut on Isaiah with terrible finality. Through the bars, his eyes met Mercy's, calm, steady, and filled with a quiet dignity that no jail cell could contain. The jailhouse smelled of old wood and tobacco. Marshal Turner sat behind his desk, studying Isaiah through narrowed eyes. The mountain man remained silent, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap, despite the iron cuffs. "Mr. Coulter, trading in persons is a serious offense," the marshal said, scratching his mustache, "especially when it involves a married woman." Isaiah's response was measured, his voice low and steady. "I broke no law." The door burst open, letting in a gust of cold air along with Mercy. Her cheeks were flushed from the winter wind, determination blazing in her eyes. "Marshal Turner, you have to listen," she insisted, stepping forward. "Isaiah didn't kidnap me. Clay traded me away himself right there in the Silver Dollar. Ask anyone who was there that night." The marshal leaned back in his creaking chair. "Ma'am, with all due respect, a man can't just trade away his wife like a horse. That's not how the law works." "Actually," Isaiah spoke up, "he can." He nodded toward his coat hanging on the wall. "Left pocket. There's a paper." The marshal retrieved a folded document worn at the creases. As he opened it, his eyebrows rose steadily. "This appears to be a proxy marriage deed, signed by Clay Haskins himself." He squinted at the torn paper. "Witnessed by Tom Jenkins, the bartender." Mercy stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly. "Clay was drunk, but he knew what he was doing. He signed it right there, said he was washing his hands of me." The marshal studied the document carefully. "Well, this does appear legal on its face, but given the unusual circumstances..." He scratched his head. "This'll have to go before Judge Wilson when he rides circuit next week. Until then..." He looked at Isaiah apologetically. "I'm afraid you'll have to stay here, Mr. Coulter, for appearance's sake." Isaiah nodded once, accepting the decision without protest. "As for you, Mrs. Haskins," the marshal continued, "you can't stay alone at the boarding house. Too many tongues wagging already." He thought for a moment. "Miss Lila Fletcher might take you in. Being the preacher's widow, her reputation's above reproach." An hour later, Mercy sat in Miss Lila's warm kitchen, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold between her hands. The older woman moved quietly around the room, her gray hair neat under her cap, her presence somehow both commanding and gentle. "Child," she said finally, settling into the chair across from Mercy, "tell me what's weighing on your heart." The kindness in her voice broke something loose inside Mercy. Words she'd held back for years spilled out like water from a broken dam. She told Lila everything, about Clay's drunken rages, the cruel words, the fists that left bruises where no one could see them. "There was a baby," Mercy whispered, her voice catching. 3 years ago, I couldn't bear to bring a child into that life, to watch Clay hurt it like he hurt me." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I took pennyroyal tea, strong doses until—" She couldn't finish. Lila reached across the table and covered Mercy's hands with her own. "The Lord knows your heart, child, and your pain. Do you think he can forgive me?" Mercy's voice was barely audible. "His mercy is new every morning," Lila answered softly, "just like your name." Across town in the jail, Isaiah sat on his narrow cot, the Bible from his saddlebag open on his knee. His deep voice filled the quiet cell as he read by lamplight. "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come." The words seemed to hover in the air, a promise of redemption that reached beyond the iron bars. In Miss Lila's kitchen, Mercy finally let her tears fall freely, each one washing away a little more of her shame. And throughout Elk Hollow, word of the proxy deed spread from porch to porch, store to store, slowly shifting the tide of gossip from scandal to sympathy. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in the quiet hours of night, seeds of understanding began to take root in the town's consciousness. A woman's choice to flee abuse, a man's quiet offer of dignity, and a document that proved sometimes salvation could come in the most unexpected ways. Morning light filtered through the jailhouse windows as Mercy stood before Pastor Ellison and Judge Wilson. Her hands were clasped tightly, but her voice remained steady. "Isaiah Coulter is a good man," she declared, meeting their questioning gazes. "He offered me safety when my own husband traded me away like cattle." Pastor Ellison, a tall man with graying temples, studied the proxy deed on the desk. The document appears legitimate, though unusual, and Tom Jenkins confirms he witnessed Clay Haskins sign it of his own accord. Judge Wilson stroked his beard thoughtfully. The law recognizes proxy marriages, even those arranged in unconventional circumstances. He turned to Isaiah, who stood quietly between two deputies. "Mr. Coulter, your reputation as an Army scout speaks in your favor. Several officers have vouched for your character." "Much obliged," Isaiah replied softly. The judge nodded. "I'm inclined to release you pending further review. However, ... He fixed them both with a stern look. "Clay Haskins' kin may still contest the homestead claim. They're a powerful family in these parts." "We understand, Your Honor," Mercy said. "Very well." The judge signed the release papers. "You're free to go, Mr. Coulter. Stay within the territory until this matter is fully settled." The ride back to the mountain cabin was peaceful, winter sunshine glinting off fresh snow. Mercy felt a weight lift from her shoulders with each mile they put between themselves and town. By late afternoon, smoke curled from their chimney once more. Days passed in quiet harmony. Mercy found herself humming old hymns as she worked. Amazing Grace, Sweet Hour of Prayer, songs she hadn't sung since before her marriage to Clay. The familiar melodies filled the cabin with warmth as she prepared their evening meals. One evening, as darkness settled over the valley, Isaiah returned from checking his trap lines. Mercy noticed immediately how he favored his right arm. "What happened?" she asked, helping him remove his heavy coat. "Slipped on some ice," he admitted. "Caught myself wrong." Mercy guided him to sit by the fire. "Let me see." She gently examined his wrist, which was swollen and tender. With practiced movements, she gathered supplies, clean cloth, cool water, and herbs she'd dried last week. "You've done this before," Isaiah observed as she wrapped his wrist. "My father was a farrier. I learned to tend sprains and such." She worked carefully, aware of how still he held himself under her touch. "This should heal well if you rest it proper." Isaiah watched the firelight play across her face. Something in her gentle care seemed to unlock something in him. "I had a wife once," he said quietly. "Annabelle." Mercy's hands stilled, but she didn't speak. "We had a son." His voice grew distant with memory. "Nathaniel, he had his mother's smile, but my mother's dark eyes." He swallowed hard. "Annabelle's family, they never approved of me. Half Cheyenne, they said, couldn't be trusted." Mercy resumed wrapping his wrist, her touch conveying understanding. "When Annabelle died of fever, they took him." Pain roughened his voice. Nathaniel was only 4. "They went to court, claimed I was dangerous, said my Indian blood made me unfit." His free hand clenched. "Paid men to testify I had a violent nature. The judge believed them." "How old would he be now?" Mercy asked softly. 17. Isaiah stared into the fire. "I tried to find them, but they moved east. Changed their names, most likely." Mercy finished securing the bandage, then rested her hand gently on his arm. The simple touch carried more comfort than words could express. They sat in shared silence as the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside. "Thank you," Isaiah said finally, "for listening, for ... He gestured to his wrapped wrist. "For this." Mercy smiled softly. "We all carry hurts that need tending." She rose to check the stew bubbling on the hearth. "Some just take longer to heal than others." As she ladled the stew into bowls, she began humming again. "Come thou fount of every blessing." Isaiah closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. For the first time in years, the weight of his loss felt a little lighter, shared with someone who understood the cost of stolen dreams and the slow path towards healing. Winter settled deep in the Montana mountains, wrapping Isaiah's homestead in pristine white. Each morning, frost etched delicate patterns on the cabin windows, and their breath hung in silver clouds as they stepped outside to begin the day's work. "Time you learn to move proper in deep snow," Isaiah said one crisp morning, holding up 2 pairs of snowshoes. The wooden frames were his own craftsmanship, the rawhide webbing pulled taut in traditional Cheyenne patterns. Mercy eyed them uncertainly. "I reckon I'll just watch you first." "Can't learn without trying." He helped her strap them onto her boots, his hands sure and respectful. "Small steps. Let the shoe do the work." Her first attempt sent her pitching forward into a snowbank. Isaiah caught her arm, steadying her, and a small laugh escaped her lips, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. His own deep chuckle joined hers, warming the winter air. "That's it," he encouraged, as she found her balance, "like walking on water." Day by day, Mercy's confidence grew. Isaiah showed her how to check rabbit snares, explaining how the animals moved in winter. "See these tracks?" He pointed to tiny impressions in the snow. "They tell stories if you know how to read them." She learned to spot the signs of water beneath frozen streams, where the ice ran thin. Isaiah demonstrated how to test its strength, how to break through safely when needed. His patience never wavered, and his quiet pride in her progress made her stand taller. When she successfully set her first trap, bringing home a plump rabbit for their stew, Isaiah's eyes crinkled with approval. "You're becoming a true mountain woman," he said softly. The comment stirred something in Mercy's heart. That evening, as she stirred the rabbit stew, she began to hum. The melody was tentative at first, barely above a whisper. But as the weeks passed, her voice grew stronger. Hymns she'd learned in childhood filled their cabin. Rock of Ages, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, the music rising clear and sweet in the mountain air. Isaiah never commented on her singing, but she caught him pausing in his work sometimes, just listening. His silence held appreciation, not judgment, and it gave her courage to sing louder. One Sunday morning, they rode double on Isaiah's horse through the snow-laden forest to attend service at Preacher Matthew's cabin. The old man ministered to scattered homesteaders and trappers, his small congregation gathering whenever weather permitted. The preacher's cabin was warm and welcoming, pine boughs decorating the walls. A dozen people squeezed onto rough benches, nodding greetings. Isaiah and Mercy sat near the back, their shoulders barely touching. Preacher Matthews opened his worn Bible to the book of Ruth. His weathered voice brought the ancient story to life, of Ruth, who chose to follow Naomi into a strange land, and of Boaz, who offered protection without demand. "Whither thou goest, I will go," the preacher read. "And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Silent tears slid down Mercy's cheeks. Isaiah's hand found hers, warm and steady, asking nothing, offering everything. She held on tight through the rest of the service. That evening, back in their cabin, Isaiah disappeared into the lean-to where he kept his tools. He returned holding something wrapped in soft deerskin. "Been working on this," he said, placing it in her hands. Mercy unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a wooden carving of a bird in flight, its wings spread wide and free. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed, the grain of the wood following the flow of movement. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the love worked into every curve. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Reminded me of your singing," Isaiah said quietly. "How it fills the air now, like you're finally free to fly." Mercy looked up at him, really looked at him. In all these months, he had never once demanded anything of her, never expected her to be more than she was. He had simply offered space to heal, to find her voice again, to remember who she was meant to be. The realization washed over her like spring sunshine. This quiet man, with his gentle hands and wounded heart, had given her what she'd always longed for. Peace. Not just the absence of violence, but true peace. The kind that came from being valued, respected, seen. She held the carved bird close to her heart, understanding now that it was more than art. It was a promise, a declaration that he saw her spirit and wanted it to soar. They sat together by the fire, the comfortable silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside their cabin, something warm and tender was taking root, as natural as spring following winter, as steady as faith, as precious as love freely given and received. Dawn crept softly over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-capped ridges in shades of rose and gold. Mercy stirred the morning fire to life, adding pine logs that sparked and crackled. Through the cabin window, she spotted Isaiah on the front porch, his knife moving with careful precision over a piece of wood. She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tight against the crisp morning air. Isaiah looked up, a gentle smile warming his weathered face. In his hands, she saw two small birds taking shape. Delicate creatures carved to match, their wings touching. "They're lovely," Mercy said, settling beside him on the rough-hewn bench. "Thought they might keep the other one company?" Isaiah replied, gesturing to the larger bird carving that now perched above their fireplace. His eyes met hers, holding a question he hadn't yet voiced. After breakfast, Isaiah saddled their horse. "Need to ride into town," he said, helping Mercy mount. "Time to file some papers." The trail to Elk Hollow had grown muddy with spring thaw, but their horse picked its way carefully down the mountain. Fresh green buds dotted the aspen branches, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called. At the land office, Isaiah spread out their documents on the clerk's desk, the proxy marriage deed, homestead papers, and new forms listing both their names. The clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, frowned as he read. "This is unusual," he said, glancing between Isaiah and Mercy. His fingers drummed against the wooden desk. "A mixed marriage, and these circumstances—" "The law's the law," Isaiah said quietly. "Papers are proper." Mercy stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're asking you to do your duty, nothing more." The clerk's pen scratched against paper for several long moments. Finally, he pressed his official seal into red wax. "Filed and recorded," he muttered, sliding the documents back. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, Sheriff Miller approached, his face grave. "Folks been looking for you," he said. "Got news you should hear." They followed him to his office, where he closed the door. "Clay Haskins is dead," he announced, without preamble. "Shot in a card game dispute 3 weeks back in Virginia City, but that ain't all." Mercy sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Isaiah's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. "His sister Lenora rode in yesterday," the sheriff continued. "She's filed suit contesting both the homestead claim and the marriage. Says her brother wasn't in his right mind when he signed those papers. Claims Isaiah here took advantage, and that Mrs. Haskins, begging your pardon, ma'am, is addled from years of abuse." "That's not true," Mercy whispered. "Truth ain't always what matters in court," Sheriff Miller said kindly. "Thought you should know what's coming." The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The news of Clay's death stirred complicated emotions in Mercy, not grief exactly, but a strange, hollow feeling, like the echo in an empty well. The threat of Lenora's suit hung over them like storm clouds. That evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Isaiah pulled his Bible from the shelf. Without a word, he knelt beside the hearth. Mercy joined him, their shoulders touching. "Lord," Isaiah began, his deep voice soft but certain, "we come before you seeking guidance. You know our hearts. You know the truth of our path together." His hand found Mercy's, warm and calloused. "Give us wisdom to face what's coming. Give us strength to stand firm in faith." "Amen," Mercy whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. They remained kneeling together, the fire casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls. The carved birds watched from above, their wooden wings forever intertwined. Morning light found them sharing coffee on the porch, watching spring clouds scud across the mountain peaks. Isaiah set his cup down carefully. "Been thinking," he said, his voice gentle. "Maybe it's time to do things proper, if you want to." He turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. "Not because of Lenora's suit, not because of what anyone might say, but because I've come to care for you, Mercy, more than I thought possible to care again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pair of carved birds, holding them in his open palm. "I know we came together strange, but what's grown between us, it's real as these mountains, strong as the trees that gave this wood." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you consider being my wife? True wife, before God and people both?" The meadowlark sang again, its clear notes carrying across the valley. Mercy looked at the carved birds nestled in Isaiah's hand, two souls finding each other against all odds, their wings touching, ready to soar together. The morning sun streamed through the church's small windows, casting golden light across rough-hewn pews. In the back room, Lila Fletcher helped Mercy smooth the borrowed cream-colored dress from the mission school. The fabric was simple but clean, adorned with a touch of lace at the collar. "There now," Lila said, pinning a sprig of wild mountain laurel to Mercy's hair. "You look beautiful, child." Mercy's fingers trembled as she touched the flowers. "Never thought I'd wear white again," she whispered. "The Lord makes all things new," Lila replied, squeezing her hand. "Isaiah's a good man. Anyone with eyes can see how he cherishes you." In the church proper, Isaiah stood beside Pastor Ellison, wearing his best buckskin jacket and a fresh cotton shirt. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his usually weathered face bore a gentle expression of anticipation. The small church filled quietly. Townsfolk slipped in, some curious, others uncertain, but all maintaining a respectful silence. The morning light caught dust motes dancing in the air as Mercy walked down the short aisle. Isaiah's eyes never left her face. Pastor Ellison's voice carried clear and strong through the chapel. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Isaiah's hands were warm as they held Mercy's. His voice was steady as he repeated his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish. When Mercy spoke her own promises, her voice grew stronger with each word. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Pastor Ellison declared. "I now pronounce you man and wife." Isaiah's kiss was gentle, reverent. Someone in the back pew began to clap, and others joined in, their initial reserve melting into genuine celebration. The moment of joy was brief. As the small gathering spilled onto the church steps, a man in an Eastern-cut suit approached, clutching a leather document case. "Mrs. Haskins?" he called out. "Or should I say Mrs. Coulter now?" Isaiah stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Mercy. "Who's asking?" "Charles Montgomery, attorney for Miss Lenora Haskins." He pulled out an official-looking paper. "I have here a summons. The territorial court will hear your case in 2 weeks' time." Mercy accepted the document with steady hands. "We expected this," she said quietly. 2 weeks, Isaiah muttered, scanning the summons. "Barely time to prepare." "Then we'd best get started," Mercy said. She turned to face him, still holding her borrowed bouquet. "I want to stay in town. We need to be ready." Isaiah's brow furrowed with concern. "The cabin can wait," Mercy finished. "This is more important." After a moment's hesitation, Isaiah nodded. "I'll see about a room." They found lodging in a small boarding house near Lila's home. The room was spare but clean, with a narrow bed and a mirror mounted on the wall. Each morning, Mercy rose early to study the court documents, learning legal terms that felt foreign on her tongue. The party of the first part, she practiced in front of the mirror, watching her reflection grow more confident. Did willfully and with sound mind execute a proxy marriage deed. Isaiah spent his days gathering witnesses, the bartender who'd been present that night, the general store owner who'd seen Clay's violent outbursts, even the station master who'd watched Clay gamble away cattle money meant for winter supplies. One afternoon, Isaiah returned with troubling news. "Virgil Haskins is planning to testify," he said, removing his hat and settling into the room's single chair. "Says Clay was drunk that night, never meant to trade you. Claims it was all a misunderstanding." Mercy's hands clenched in her lap. "He knows that's not true. Clay knew exactly what he was doing. He'd threatened to sell me before." "Can you say that in court?" Isaiah asked gently. "Tell the whole truth of it?" Mercy stood and walked to the window, watching townsfolk pass below on the dusty street. "I have to," she said finally. "Not just for us, but for every woman who's been treated like property." She turned back to Isaiah. "I won't let them make me ashamed anymore." Isaiah crossed the room and took her hands in his. "You're the bravest person I know," he said softly. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, I'm proud to call you my wife." Mercy leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence. Outside, the spring wind rustled through new leaves, carrying the promise of change. In 2 weeks, they would face Lenora's accusations and Virgil's lies. But for now, in this moment, they held each other close, united in love and purpose, ready to fight for their future together. The territorial courthouse buzzed with whispers as people packed the wooden benches. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Mercy sat beside Isaiah, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Lila Fletcher occupied the seat behind them, a steady presence at their backs. When the bailiff called Mercy's name, she rose on trembling legs. The witness box felt small and exposed. She could feel every eye in the room watching her, including Virgil Haskins' cold stare from across the aisle. "Please state your name for the court," the judge instructed, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "Mercy Haskins Coulter," she answered, her voice soft but clear. "Tell us about the night of December 3rd, 1884, the prosecutor prompted. Mercy took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the rail of the witness box. "My first husband, Clay Haskins, was drunk at Miller's saloon. He'd been berating me for hours, calling me worthless." Her voice quavered but held strong. "Then he saw Isaiah Coulter at the bar and offered to trade me for whiskey and a rifle." "And you went willingly?" "Yes, sir. Clay had beaten me before. Many times, Isaiah—" She glanced at her husband, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "Isaiah showed me kindness, gave me peace." When Lila took the stand next, her testimony carried the weight of years of observation. "I treated Mercy's injuries more than once," she stated firmly. "Bruised ribs, split lip, worse. Clay Haskins was a cruel man who treated his wife like property." The saloon owner, Tom Miller, confirmed the trade. "Clay was drunk, sure, but he knew what he was doing. Made quite a show of it, too. Said she wasn't worth more than cheap whiskey and a rusted gun." But when Virgil Haskins took the stand, his polished manner and careful words began to sway the room. "My brother had his faults," he admitted smoothly, "but he was not in his right mind that night. The trade was nothing but drunken foolishness. He meant to retrieve his wife the next day." The judge leaned forward, considering. "And the proxy marriage deed?" "Clay never would have signed such a thing sober," Virgil insisted. "That half-breed trapper took advantage." The courthouse doors suddenly creaked open, cutting off Virgil's words. A young man stepped into the room, tall and lean, with dark hair and familiar features. Isaiah's breath caught audibly. The stranger moved forward with purpose, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Your Honor," he called out, "I need to speak." The judge peered down at him. "Young man, this is a legal proceeding. You can't simply—" "My name is Nathaniel Coulter," the youth announced, his voice ringing clear. "Isaiah Coulter is my father." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Isaiah stood, his face a mix of shock and longing. "Nathaniel?" The judge banged his gavel. "Order, young man, approach the bench." Nathaniel walked forward, pulling a worn envelope from his coat. "I have something you need to see, Your Honor. A letter from my grandmother, written on her deathbed 3 months ago." The judge accepted the envelope, examining its contents with careful scrutiny. "This appears to be a signed confession," he announced, from Margaret Wheeler, stating that she and her husband falsely testified about Isaiah Coulter's character 17 years ago to gain custody of their grandson. Isaiah's hands gripped the rail before him, his knuckles white. Mercy reached up to touch his arm, offering silent support. "My grandparents told me he was dangerous," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "But grandmother couldn't bear the lie anymore. Before she died, she told me everything. How they'd used their connections and prejudice against my father's Cheyenne blood to take me away." The judge studied the letter carefully. "This is a serious allegation of perjury, young man. Are you willing to remain in town for further inquiry into this matter?" "Yes, sir," Nathaniel answered firmly. "I've come to know the truth about my father, and I aim to see justice done." The courtroom had grown perfectly still. Isaiah stared at his son, taking in every detail of the young man's face, seeing echoes of both himself and Annabelle in his features. Tears glinted in his eyes, but he remained silent, letting Nathaniel's words stand on their own. Virgil Haskins shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge reviewed both the old custody documents and the fresh confession. The previous swagger had drained from his posture, replaced by uncertain glances toward his lawyer. The judge cleared his throat. In light of this new evidence regarding Mr. Coulter's character and past legal proceedings, this court will require additional testimony. Mr. Nathaniel Coulter, you will present yourself tomorrow morning for a formal deposition. Court is recessed until 10 o'clock tomorrow. The bang of the gavel seemed to break a spell. The crowded room erupted in conversation as Isaiah slowly made his way toward his son. They stood face to face, 17 years of absence stretching between them like a canyon. Neither spoke immediately, each searching the other's face for traces of shared blood and lost time. Spring sunshine warmed the boarding house porch as Isaiah and Nathaniel sat in matching rocking chairs, their movements as hesitant as their conversation. The creaking of wood filled the spaces between their words. "Grandmother told me everything just before she passed," Nathaniel said, his fingers tracing the carved arms of his chair. "About the court hearing, about how they—" He swallowed hard. "How they used your Cheyenne blood against you." Isaiah's weathered hands stilled on the chair. "I searched for you," he said softly. "For years. Wrote letters. They came back unopened. They told me you were dangerous." Nathaniel's voice cracked. "Said you'd abandoned us. But I always felt something wasn't right. I'd dream sometimes, remember bits and pieces. You teaching me to whittle, singing Cheyenne lullabies." Inside the boarding house, Mercy worked quietly at the stove, giving father and son space while keeping watch through the window. Miss Lila sat at the kitchen table, mending a torn shirt sleeve. Each morning, Isaiah and Nathaniel walked through town together, their boots marking steady paths through the muddy streets. They stopped at the general store, where Nathaniel showed his father the sketches he carried in a leather portfolio, drawings of mountains, horses, and one faded portrait of a woman with kind eyes. "Your mother," Isaiah said, touching the paper gently. "You have her talent." "I remember her some," Nathaniel admitted, "but mostly from the stories grandmother told. Was she happy with you?" Isaiah's eyes grew distant. "We had 3 good years together. Before her family ... He cleared his throat. "Before they decided I wasn't fit to raise my own son." Back at the boarding house, Nathaniel showed an immediate warmth toward Mercy. He pulled out her chair at meals, calling her ma'am with genuine respect. One evening, as she served coffee, he touched her arm gently. "Thank you," he said, his voice earnest, "for seeing who my father really is, for treating him right." Mercy's eyes welled up. "He's a good man," she replied softly. "I'm blessed to know you both." In the courthouse 3 days later, the judge sat at his bench reviewing Nathaniel's testimony and his grandmother's letter. Lenora Haskins fidgeted in her seat, her face pinched with frustration as her case continued to unravel. "This letter," the judge announced, holding up the worn paper, "bears not only Margaret Wheeler's signature, but also that of Reverend Thomas Green as witness. Its authenticity is beyond question." He turned stern eyes toward Lenora's attorney. "It provides compelling evidence of Mr. Coulter's character and the unfortunate prejudices that robbed him of his parental rights 17 years ago." Lenora shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly a scheme. The boy shows up right when the inheritance is in question. He's after Clay's property, nothing more." The judge's gavel cracked sharply. "Mrs. Haskins, you will remain seated and silent. Unfounded accusations of conspiracy will do nothing to strengthen your position in this court." Isaiah sat straight-backed between Mercy and Nathaniel, his dignity a quiet rebuke to Lenora's outburst. His son's shoulder pressed against his, a small gesture of support that spoke volumes. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court cannot ignore the documented history of abuse Mrs. Coulter suffered at the hands of Clay Haskins, nor the multiple witnesses to his public abandonment of her. The proxy marriage deed, while unusual, appears legally sound." Lenora's attorney rose slowly. Your Honor, we request time to examine. Denied. The judge cut in. This court has seen more than sufficient evidence. We will proceed to final arguments tomorrow morning. He fixed Lenora with a stern gaze. And I advise all parties to refrain from further slander or contempt charges may be considered. As they left the courthouse, Nathaniel walked between Isaiah and Mercy, his presence bridging years of loss and loneliness. The townspeople who had once whispered behind their backs now nodded in greeting, their judgment softened by the obvious bond between father and son. That evening, in the boarding house parlor, Nathaniel pulled out his sketchbook again. I started drawing these after grandmother told me the truth, he explained, showing them page after page of mountain scenes. I kept thinking about where you might be, imagining the kind of place you'd call home. Isaiah studied the drawings, recognition dawning in his eyes. These look like the view from our cabin, he said quietly. How did you know? Nathaniel smiled. Maybe I remembered more than I thought. Or maybe. He glanced at Mercy. Maybe some things are just meant to be? Mercy touched both their hands, forming a circle of connection. Outside the window, spring birds called to each other in the gathering dusk, their songs carrying messages of renewal and return. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows as the judge adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. The packed room fell silent. Isaiah sat perfectly still, his shoulders straight, while Mercy's hands twisted in her lap. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly in his seat behind them. Having reviewed all testimony and evidence presented, the judge began, his voice carrying to every corner, this court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claims against Isaiah and Mercy Coulter's marriage or their rightful claim to the homestead property. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Mercy's breath caught in her throat. The proxy marriage deed, though unconventional, was legally executed. Furthermore, the judge continued, fixing Lenora with a stern gaze, the plaintiff's repeated attempts to malign Mr. Coulter's character, despite clear evidence of his good standing, cannot be overlooked. He shuffled his papers deliberately. Mrs. Haskins, this court fines you $25 for willful slander. You will also pay all court costs in this matter. Lenora's face flushed red. Her attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm as she started to rise. This court upholds the marriage of Isaiah and Mercy Coulter as legal and binding. Their homestead claim remains valid under territory law. The judge's gavel struck with finality. This case is dismissed. The crowd began to stir and move. Outside the courthouse, spring sunshine warmed the wooden sidewalks. Mercy made it 3 steps before her composure crumbled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as months of tension released. Isaiah gathered her close, his strong arms steady around her shoulders. It's done, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. We're home free. Nathaniel stood nearby, watching his father comfort Mercy with quiet pride in his eyes. The boy's presence seemed to complete something long broken, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. They collected their horses from the livery stable, where the owner nodded respectfully to Isaiah for the first time since they had arrived in town. The ride home took them through melting snow and patches of fresh grass. The high valley was waking from winter, with new buds dotting the aspen branches and mountain streams running full with spring thaw. Mercy rode between Isaiah and Nathaniel, occasionally wiping happy tears from her eyes. Listen, she said as they climbed higher into the mountains. The birds are back. Isaiah smiled. Spring comes late up here, but it always comes. When they reached the cabin, smoke still curled from the chimney, where Miss Lila had kept the fire going during their absence. Inside, everything was neat and waiting. Mercy went straight to the wooden bird carving Isaiah had given her months ago. With reverent hands, she hung it back above the hearth where it belonged. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of the small side room, taking in the narrow bed and rough-hewn dresser. He set down his worn carpet bag and pulled out a handful of charcoal sketches, carefully tacking them to the log walls. "It ain't much," Isaiah said, watching his son, "but we can build on come summer." "It's perfect," Nathaniel replied, his voice firm. "It's home." As evening settled over the mountains, Mercy stirred a pot of rabbit stew hanging over the fire. The familiar scents of sage and thyme filled the cabin. Isaiah showed Nathaniel how to properly stack wood in the box beside the hearth, their movements growing more natural with each passing hour. They gathered around the table, lamplight casting warm shadows on the walls. Steam rose from their bowls as Isaiah bowed his head to say grace. "Lord," he prayed, his voice thick with gratitude, "thank you for bringing us home, all of us." After the meal, they sat by the fire. Mercy began to hum softly, an old hymn about grace and redemption. To her surprise, Isaiah's deep voice joined in, carrying the harmony just as he had in their early days together. Nathaniel watched them both, his eyes bright with belonging. The fire crackled and popped, throwing sparks up the chimney. Outside, spring winds whispered through the pines. But inside the cabin, 3 hearts beat in perfect time, a family forged in faith and forgiveness, finally whole. Spring settled fully into the high valley, painting the mountainsides with fresh green. The sound of Isaiah's axe rang through the crisp morning air as he and Nathaniel worked on the cabin addition. Logs needed splitting, and the boy took to the task with enthusiasm, though his hands weren't yet calloused like his father's. "Like this," Isaiah demonstrated, positioning the wedge just so. "Let the weight of the maul do the work." He swung in one fluid motion, and the log split clean down the middle. Nathaniel nodded, studying his father's technique. His own attempts were less graceful but earnest. "Ma'am says you built this whole cabin yourself," he said between swings. "That I did." Isaiah steadied another log. "Took near 2 summers, worth every splinter." While they worked, Mercy knelt in the freshly turned earth behind the cabin. Her hands worked the soil, breaking up clumps and pulling stones. She had marked out neat rows with string, planning for carrots, beans, and hardy greens that could weather the mountain's short growing season. The work felt good, like putting down roots of her own. The clip-clop of hooves drew their attention as Reverend Matthews, the circuit preacher, rode up the trail. His saddlebags bulged with Bibles and hymn books. Isaiah set down his maul and went to greet him. "The Lord's blessings on this house," the preacher called out, dismounting. His eyes took in the construction work and garden plot with approval. "I see you folks are settling in proper." They invited him inside for coffee. While Mercy poured, the Reverend spoke of his spring rounds, visiting scattered homesteads and mining camps. "We're holding service next Sunday at Miller's Creek," he said. "I remember your voice from winter services, Mrs. Coulter. Would you consider sharing a hymn?" Mercy's cheeks colored slightly. "I would be honored, Reverend." "She sings like an angel," Nathaniel offered, earning a warm smile from his stepmother. After the preacher left, they returned to their tasks. Isaiah and Nathaniel raised the first wall of the addition, while Mercy planted her first row of seeds. The air filled with the mingled sounds of hammering, birdsong, and Mercy's quiet humming as she worked. That evening, while Nathaniel practiced his letters by lamplight, the postwriter delivered a letter from Pastor Ellison in town. Mercy read it aloud at the table. "Dear Isaiah and Mercy, your testimony of faith and true partnership has touched many hearts. Several young couples in our congregation have asked for guidance in building marriages founded on mutual respect and understanding. Would you consider sharing your wisdom with them? Your story could help others find their way to real marriage built on God's love. With gratitude, Pastor Ellison." Mercy laughed, the sound bright and free. "Who would have thought? Us teaching about marriage?" Isaiah smiled, reaching for her hand across the table. "Who better? We learned it the hard way." Then yes, Mercy said, squeezing his fingers. We'll help however we can. The next afternoon, while Mercy hung wash on the line, Isaiah disappeared into his workshop, a lean-to shelter where he did his carving. He emerged just before sunset, carrying something covered with a blanket. Got something for you, he said softly, setting it down in their bedroom. Mercy followed him, curious. When he pulled away the blanket, her breath caught. A cradle stood there, carved from rich pine wood. Delicate birds decorated the headboard, each feather detailed with loving care. The rockers curved gracefully, promising gentle motion. Just in case, Isaiah said, running his hand along the smooth wood. His eyes held no demands, no expectations, only love. Mercy touched the cradle, tracing the birds with trembling fingers. Tears welled up, but not from sadness. She turned to Isaiah and kissed him, soft and sure. Even if never, she whispered against his chest. I'm full. He held her close, understanding in his silence. They had built something precious here, a family crafted from choice and grace, not obligation. The cradle would stand ready, but their love didn't depend on it. Outside their window, spring twilight painted the mountains purple. Nathaniel's voice drifted in from the main room, reading his Bible verses aloud. The wash fluttered on the line, like prayer flags in the evening breeze. In the garden, tiny seeds took root in welcoming soil, promising growth in their own time. Mercy stepped back, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. Thank you, she said simply. Isaiah nodded, his eyes soft. For what we have, he said. For what may come. For all of it. She smiled, knowing he meant more than just the cradle. Their life together had grown into something neither could have imagined that first night at the saloon, something built on respect, understanding, and patient love. Whether or not they ever rocked a baby in that beautiful cradle, their family was complete in all the ways that mattered most. The spring evening wrapped Miller's Creek Chapel in golden light. Through the open windows, the scent of wild roses mingled with lamp oil and freshly swept pine floors. The little church, barely more than a cabin with a cross, filled steadily with families from scattered homesteads and nearby settlements. Isaiah and Nathaniel sat in the front pew, their Sunday clothes brushed clean. Mercy stood near Reverend Matthews at the front, her hands clasped quietly before her. When the preacher nodded, she took a deep breath and began to sing. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Her voice filled the chapel, clear and sweet as mountain water. The setting sun painted the rough-hewn walls with amber light, and the congregation sat spellbound. Isaiah watched his wife with quiet pride, tears gathering in his eyes. Beside him, Nathaniel wiped at his own cheeks, trying to be subtle about it. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. The familiar words took on new meaning, speaking of journeys and redemption. Some of the older women who had once whispered behind their hands now swayed gently with the hymn. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had been among the loudest critics, closed her eyes in appreciation. When the last note faded into the twilight, silence held for a moment before the congregation burst into heartfelt amens. After the service, people gathered around the Coulters. Beautiful singing, Mrs. Coulter, said the blacksmith's wife, squeezing Mercy's hand. You must join Our Ladies' Aid Society. Mighty fine family you've built, added old Mr. Jenkins, tipping his hat to Isaiah. The ride home was peaceful, their horses picking their way along the shadowed trail by starlight. Near the halfway point, Nathaniel cleared his throat. I've been thinking, he said carefully. If it's all right with you both, I'd like to stay. For good, I mean. Isaiah reined his horse to a stop, turning in his saddle. You sure, son? Never been more sure of anything, Nathaniel replied. Then it's settled, Mercy said warmly. You're home." Back at the cabin, they lit the lamps and moved Nathaniel's drawings from his saddlebag to the walls. His sketches of mountains and wildlife transformed the rough walls into a gallery of careful observation. Mercy hung his portrait of Isaiah by the window, where morning light would catch it best. They gathered around the table for a simple supper of bread and stew. Isaiah bowed his head to say, "Grace," his voice rough with emotion. "Lord, we thank you for second chances, for bringing us together, for making us a family." "Amen," Mercy and Nathaniel echoed softly, their voices blending in the peaceful evening air. Spring settled into the high country like a gentle breath. Where snow had blanketed the ridge just weeks ago, purple lupines and golden balsam root now dotted the slopes. The morning air carried the sharp scent of pine sap and new grass, while afternoons brought warm breezes that rustled through fresh leaves. Isaiah took Nathaniel to his favorite fishing spots along Miller's Creek, teaching him the patient art of reading water. "See how it ripples there?" he would say, pointing to swirling eddies. "That's where the big ones rest." Nathaniel absorbed every word, his artist's eye noting how sunlight dappled the stream bed. In the cabin's warm kitchen, Mercy showed him her own kind of patience. "Bread's got its own time," she explained, guiding his hands through the kneading. "Can't rush it, can't neglect it." Nathaniel's first loaves came out lumpy but edible, and his proud smile lit up the room. Each evening, they gathered around the oak table Isaiah had built. By lamplight, they took turns reading from Isaiah's worn leather Bible. Nathaniel's voice grew stronger with each passage, while Mercy's quiet alto gave the ancient words new life. Isaiah would sometimes translate verses into Cheyenne, the musical sounds filling their home with another layer of meaning. One mild afternoon, while Isaiah mended fence posts and Nathaniel sketched nearby, Mercy stood at the cabin door. Her fingers found the familiar threads of her old shawl, the one she'd wrapped around herself that night at the saloon when Clay had traded her away. She'd kept it all this time, tucked in a trunk like a reminder of shame. Without a word, she carried it to the fire pit. Isaiah noticed and set down his tools, walking over to stand beside her. She struck a match and touched it to the worn fabric. The wool caught slowly at first, then blazed. Neither spoke as the flames consumed what had once been both protection and prison. Back inside, they found Nathaniel by the hearth, his knife moving carefully across a piece of pine. Wooden shavings curled around his boots like question marks. Mercy knelt beside him, one hand finding his, the other reaching for Isaiah's weathered fingers. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice clear and steady, "thank you for this family. For this home. For showing me I was never truly lost." Her grip tightened gently on their hands. "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't a trade, but a gift." Through the open window came the sweet trill of mountain bluebirds, their song carrying on the afternoon breeze. Mercy felt the last weight lift from her heart, light as the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. For the first time since she was a girl, she felt completely, wonderfully free. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.